From the moment he walked into Game and Fish headquarters in Cheyenne and said he was Joe Pickett and he was there to see Les Etbauer for a meeting, the atmosphere changed within the room. The receptionist looked at him warily and pushed herself away from her desk as if he were contagious. Joe noticed that two young female license agents shot looks at him the instant they heard his name, then quickly turned back to their computer monitors as if suddenly reading the most fascinating emails they had ever seen. The receptionist directed him down a long hallway and told him to take a seat on the molded plastic seat outside of a door, painted on the frosted glass with the words, Leslie Etbauer, Assistant Director. Joe took off his hat and sat down. There wasn't much to look at. The sprawling cinder block building had been built in the early 1960s, and the walls were painted institutional yellow and lit with industrial neon tubes. The hallway was narrow, and the black and white checkerboard linoleum floor was scarred. It was the kind of hallway that echoed and amplified the rat-a-tat sounds of clicking heels as people walked down it. Not that there were many employees about. Most of the doors in the hall were shut, and there were no lights on behind the glass. He recognized many of the names on the doors as his agency superiors, but apparently they were already gone for the day. As he sat waiting for Les Etbauer, Joe realized that he felt as though he was back in grade school and he'd been sent to the principal's office. Like most of the field wardens, Joe had spent as little time as possible inside this building. This was where the agency bureaucracy was, where policy was set and regulations formed. It was here that the director met with the governor and individual legislators while they were in town for the legislative session, and where laws and new regulations were hammered out and concessions were made. This was a place where hunters, fishermen, landowners, and environmentalists stormed, although they rarely made it past the front counter when things didn't go their particular way. It was a place where all of those departmental memos came from. It was a place where they knew him, but he really didn't know them. During the long drive to Cheyenne, Joe had a lot of time to think. He had mulled over not only where the investigation of the outfitter murder seemed to be leading him, but also about the things Vern had said in the bar. It was the first time since this had all started that Joe had the free time to try and put the things that he'd learned together. The conclusions he had reached unsettled him. A man with an open collar and a short-sleeved dress shirt that stretched across his large belly approached from an office far down the hallway, and Joe looked up at him as he passed. The man stopped warily and turned around. You're Joe Pickett?" the man asked. Joe nodded. The man looked down the hall in both directions to make sure no one was coming. I just want you to know that there are a lot of people here who think you're getting screwed." "Really?" Joe had not realized he had been the subject of discussion at headquarters, although the behavior of two licensed clerks behind the counter had hinted at that. The man took a tentative step toward Joe and bent forward. "We hope you fight it and take it all the way to the governor," he said. "This kind of good old boy shit has gone far enough." Joe was confused. "You seem to know a lot more about what's going to happen here than I do." The man snorted, and a smug look passed over his face. "Why do you think they'd want you here at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon if the whole thing wasn't cut and dried? Think about it. If you get mad and want to protest, there's nobody to hear you until Monday morning." "What?" Joe started to ask, but the man turned quickly on his heel and continued down the hall. The receptionist had reappeared. He was going to be suspended. It was simply a matter of time until Etbauer pronounced those words. He had said a lot of words, Joe thought, but not those. Joe sat and listened. His mouth was dry, and his hands were wet. He couldn't quite believe this was happening, even as he sat there. In his career, he had never received either a verbal or a written warning regarding his conduct, except for when he arrested the new governor for fishing without a license. His performance reviews had always been good, if not brilliant. He had done his job well, he thought, to the best of his ability and according to regulations. He had tried very hard to be honest and fair. He had not cut corners, and he had worked hard. The time he spent working was far beyond what was required of him, and he never asked for overtime or compensatory time. He never cheated on expense reports. He had reported what had happened with Oak Keeley because it was the right thing to do. He had never even suspected that it would result in anything but, at the worst, a mild reprimand. After all, he had recovered the weapon and arrested Oates with an ironclad case of poaching. But he was going to be suspended. Joe felt as though the wind had been kicked out of him. Etbauer went on and on in a thin, nasal voice. He sat behind his desk and read aloud the report Joe had written about Oak Keeley taking his gun. When he was through reading Joe's report, Ed Bauer found the passages in the agency handbook that pertained to department-issued firearms and read those aloud. Joe hoped like hell that Ed Bauer wouldn't notice that he wasn't wearing his gun now and ask him about it. Ed Bauer had a wide, flushed alcoholic face and thick, photo-grade glasses. Joe also noticed that he was balding. He didn't speak with Joe as much as speak to him. There was a quiver in his voice, and he mispronounced some words. It was as if Ed Bauer was reading aloud from a script. Joe didn't know much about Ed Bauer, but he had heard things. According to Wasey, Ed Bauer had gone straight from the U.S. Army to the Game and Fish Department without a real job in between. Wasey had called Ed Bauer the ultimate government employee, a man who had never collected a paycheck in his life that wasn't from either the state or the federal government. He had attained his rank due to a particularly bureaucratic method known as ADV, or Advanced Due to Vacancy. That meant that Ed Bauer simply put in his time and moved up as others moved out or retired. As state employees either left to take other jobs or start businesses of their own, bureaucrats like Ed Bauer, who no private sector employer would ever want on the payroll, simply grew in power and seniority like a tumor within the agency. Joe had always considered individual words as finite units of currency, and he believed in savings. He never wanted to waste or unnecessarily expend words. To Joe, words meant things. They should be spent wisely. Joe sometimes paused for a long time until he could come up with the right words to express exactly what he wanted to say. Sometimes it confused people. Mary Beth fretted that perhaps people thought Joe was slow. But Joe could live with that. That's why Joe despised meetings where he felt the participants acted as if they were paid by the number of words spoken, and, as a result, the words began to cheapen by the minute until they meant nothing at all. In Joe's experience, the person who talked the most very often had the least to say. He sometimes wished that every human was allotted a certain number of words to use for their lifetime. When the allotment ran out, that person would be forced into silence. If this were the case, Joe would still have more than enough in his account, while people like Les Ed Bauer would be very quiet. Joe had attended meetings where little got accomplished except what he considered the random, drive-by spewing of words, like unaimed machine gun bullets. What a waste of words, he often thought. What a waste of currency. What a waste of bullets. Joe realized that there had finally been a pause and snapped back to the present. Ed Bauer was staring at him. I said, Ed Bauer asked, miffed that Joe had ignored him, how could something like this happen? Easier than you might think, retorted Joe. Ed Bauer narrowed his eyes with scorn. This was not the answer he had been waiting to hear. I was writing out a citation, Joe said. It's in the report. I was holding the clipboard with one hand and a pen with the other. I admitted that I wasn't prepared for what happened, and I regret that it happened. It is my fault that I've let it happen. But he took your weapon, Ed Bauer said, as if bolstering his case. He took it from you while you just stood there. Ed Bauer said it with disbelief, as if he couldn't imagine anyone being as stupid as Joe Pickett. Joe stood up suddenly from his chair, reached across the desk, plucked Ed Bauer's name badge from his shirt pocket, and sat back down. Ed Bauer looked at him with wide eyes and a hint of panic. What I mean? Joe asked, holding up the name badge. Even if you realize what's going on, sometimes you just can't react quickly enough because you're kind of boggled that's happening in the first place. Ed Bauer swallowed, trying to recover his authority, but his voice was weak. Give me back my badge. Joe slid it across the desk. You thought I was going to pop you in the mouth, didn't you? Joe asked. You thought I was going to pop you in the mouth, didn't you? Joe asked. And you still weren't able to do anything about it. Well, that's what happened with Oat. I screwed up, but I didn't expect it at the time. Just like you. Ed Bauer's face was now bright red. He wouldn't look Joe in the eye. When he said that he had carefully reviewed the report and the evidence, and that his determination was that Joe was to be officially suspended without pay as of next Tuesday, September 30th, he was declaring all of it to a place on the wall behind and far to the right of where Joe sat. In addition, Ed Bauer said there have been some other very disturbing reports, serious allegations. We plan to investigate whether or not there has been a serious dereliction of duty while you investigate murders that have already been solved. And there is some question of whether or not you destroyed evidence that could link the accused to the crime. When Joe asked who had made the reports, Ed Bauer cautioned that he was not at liberty to say. Joe felt a chill snake down his spine. Ed Bauer continued, Let me inform you right now that because of your recent actions and behavior, we are going to investigate whether or not you should be a suspect in the crimes themselves. Do you understand the gravity of this? Joe nodded. He certainly did, but he had trouble speaking. Me? A suspect? He finally croaked. You, a suspect, Ed Bauer confirmed, his smile cruel. We hope you can be cleared quickly because, frankly, if you aren't, it would cast the entire department under a black cloud, and we wouldn't want that. Joe sighed. Ed Bauer was clearly a vicious, petty bureaucrat who lived for opportunities like this. Department policy states that you can challenge the suspension at the next game. Department policy states that you can challenge the suspension at the next Game and Fish Commission meeting, which takes place at the end of next month, by submitting a written appeal to the director. You've got 3 days to journal your area. Duties will be turned over to an interim warden in an adjacent district who will be assigned on Monday. Joe discovered that his mouth was too dry to swallow. You're dismissed, Ed Bauer said. There's not much more I can say right now. Joe stood. He knew it would all hit him later, but at the moment he felt both angry and oddly calm. At least give the Saddle String District to Wasey Headman, Joe said. He knows it pretty well, and he's a good hand. Consider it, Ed Bauer said, fingering the name badge Joe had snatched. You're dismissed. Before Joe opened the door, he turned to Ed Bauer. Have you ever done this before? Joe asked. Suspended an active field warden for this kind of first-time violation? Ed Bauer flushed again and looked away. Joe followed Ed Bauer's sight line. He was looking at a digital clock on a credenza behind him. It was 4:58 p.m. Anybody tell you to do this now? Joe asked. Of course not, Ed Bauer replied, still looking at the clock. Nobody called you and said, Les, I need you to move this picket gun thing to the top of the pile? Ed Bauer wheeled around in his chair. Of course not. He was defensive. This conversation is over. Joe opened the door. The receptionist, who had been standing outside, listening, quickly gathered herself together and escaped down the hallway, her shoes clicking like an old royal typewriter. It was never a conversation, Joe said to Ed Bauer. A lynching maybe, but not a conversation. He slammed the door so hard behind him that he stopped in the hall to make sure he hadn't cracked the glass. He found an unoccupied, unlocked office and called Maribeth at the Kensinger house. Joe still felt strangely calm, but the need to talk to his wife was urgent. He wanted her thoughts after he told her what had happened. When she answered the telephone, he asked her how she liked the new place. Oh, it's nice, she said, but he could tell from her voice that she was completely enraptured. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a beautiful deck that overlooks the 12 Sleep River, a jacuzzi, a kitchen the size of our house, and a dining room the size of a stadium. All of the closets are walk-in, and so is a refrigerator, a breakfast bar, and 3 fireplaces, one in the master bedroom. Mom and Lucy just love it. Right now, they're out walking Maxine and the Kensinger dog around the golf course. Joe felt better just hearing her voice. After what he'd just been through, he needed to hear it. You didn't mention Sheridan, Joe said. What does she think? Maribeth paused before she spoke. I don't know for sure. She doesn't seem real excited for some reason. She didn't eat any lunch, and she didn't want to go out with Mom. She's just sitting in the living room, staring out the window. Is it just a change of scenery? Joe asked, thinking about how much they had moved Sheridan around from place to place in the last few years. The consistency and routine of the Saddle String house was something Sheridan obviously enjoyed. Maybe she thought they were moving again. I hope that's all it is, Maribeth said. I hope she isn't coming down with something. Joe agreed. Then he said it. Maribeth, the department has suspended me without pay as of Tuesday because O'Keely took my gun. They also suspect me of somehow being involved in the Outfitter murders. She gasped. Oh my God, Joe. He said nothing, and neither did Maribeth. Finally, he asked if she was still there. Joe, what does this mean? 2 things, I think, Joe said, with as much confidence as he could muster. The first is that there are some pretty powerful people who want me out of the field. The second is that it looks like you're talking to the newest employee of Interwest Resources. Are you sure? She asked. Joe, is this something you really want to do? Her concern was genuine, and he loved her for it. I don't see a lot of options, he said. I've got a family to support. What about the house? Maribeth asked. We can stay in it through an appeal, if we decide to appeal. Joe, I've got 3 days before I'm officially relieved, Joe interrupted. I want to spend those 3 days following up on a few things I was thinking about on the ride down here. Then I'll let Vern know what the decision is. Is that okay with you? Of course. I'll be home tonight, Joe said. But don't wait up for me. I love you, Joe Pickett, Maribeth said. I love you, too. Joe went downstairs into an area marked Wildlife Biology section. He walked past a desk already vacated by a secretary, then into a maze of small cubicles and tables littered with lab equipment. It smelled of wet fur and feathers and strong disinfectant, and without any windows, it was dark down there. His footsteps seemed amplified in the empty room as he walked through the middle corridor, looking for anyone who might still be working. When he saw the woman emerge from her cubicle with a jacket folded over her arm and a handbag, he knew immediately who she was. She had that harried look about her that said she had children at daycare and she was on her way to pick them up. Working late on Friday? Joe asked, smiling. Later than I wanted to be, she said, looking him over and clearly wondering why he was down there. Can I help you find something? I'm kind of in a hurry. He recognized her voice. I'm Joe Pickett, he said. I believe we spoke on the telephone last week. The look on her face confirmed it. Her expression was pain. I'm sorry to bother you when you're in a hurry and all, so I'll get right to it, Joe said. I appreciate what you did. It took guts, and I know you could get in trouble for it. As far as I'm concerned, we're not even talking right now. I don't know your name, and I'm not going to ask. She continued to watch him suspiciously. He could tell that she was trying to decide whether or not to simply walk away. Yes, she prompted. Would you please show me where I can look up some information on endangered species? Actually, it's an animal that is thought to be extinct. Her face was a mask. Is the species indigenous to Wyoming and the Rocky Mountains? Yep. She made her mind and shrugged. Oh, come on, she said. It will only take a minute, and then you're on your own. She walked quickly down the length of the room into a library cluttered with reference books and journals. Joe followed. There was a computer and fax machine on one stand and a microfiche reader on another. She put her coat and handbag on a shelf while she booted up the computer, double-clicked through a series of menu screens, and pulled up a document database. Do you know how to operate this? She asked. I do, Joe said. He thought he did. Anyway, key in what you're looking for. If the search turns up something, you'll get an index number and a title for the publication. The reference books are on the shelves behind you and next door in the resource room. She stood up and quickly gathered her belongings. I'm out of here. He called her after. One more thing. She wheeled, obviously out of patience. Did anyone locate the package I sent here? She sighed. Tried the incinerator. Thank you again. Forget it, she sang over her shoulder as she walked away. I really mean that. Make sure you shut off the computer and the lights when you leave. And if anyone comes down here, just leave and don't say anything. It's a deal, Joe said, chuckling. He liked her. He sat and turned to the computer monitor. After taking a few moments to figure out how to move around within the document, he pulled up the find command and typed in the words, Miller's Weasel. When Joe was through reading, he drove into downtown Cheyenne and bought a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver at a pawn shop for $275. Farther down on the same block, he bought a box of cartridges for it.